Вибачте, не можу говорити.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, Pani та Panova, we are continuing the series of conversation and interviews with intellectuals in Ukraine with those around the world who are keen to hear from the original sources. This is a project of PEN Ukraine, whose entire team is in Ukraine right now, besieged by the terror and the violence of the continuing invasion of the Russian army. We all admire your dedication to spread the truth and uphold the freedom of expression. Ми продовжуємо серію розмов чи інтерв'ю з інтелектуалами в Україні і з тими, хто по всьому світу прагне бути ближче до першоджерел. Це проєкт українського ПЕН, вся команда якого нині перебуває в Україні і працює в умовах терору і насильства триваючого вторгнення російської армії. Ми всі захоплюємося вашою сміливістю та відданістю поширенню свободи слова та правдивої інформації. The project is co-hosted by PEN International, which has continued to provide a platform for freedom of expression for those currently under the highest risk. Our partners for today are PEN America, the Ukrainian Institute, the Ukrainian Institute London, and the Harvard University Ukrainian Research Institute. We are streaming today's event to all their Facebook pages as well. Співорганізатором проєкту є PEN International, який підтримує обізнаність і надає платформу для свободи слова для тих, хто зараз знаходиться в зоні найбільшого ризику. Нашими партнерами в цьому проєкті є PEN Америка, Український інститут Лондона, Український науковий інститут Гарвардського університету. Сьогоднішню подію ми також транслюємо на усі партнерські сторінки у Facebook. I will switch to English and present you today's speakers, two legends I absolutely admire. Перемикаюсь на українську, і захід відбуватиметься англійською мовою. Serh Plokhii is a Mikhailo Vrushlevsky Professor of Ukrainian History at Harvard University and the Director of the University Ukrainian Research Institute. He is an author of numerous books, including The Last Empire, which received the Lionel Gelbart Prize for the Best Book on International Relations, and a multi-awarded Chernobyl. His other books, even by their titles, represent the long history of the region. Lost Kingdom, A History of Russian Nationalism from Ivan the Great to Vladimir Putin. Yalta, The Prize of Peace. The Man with the Poison Guide, A Cold War Spy Story. Ukraine's Maidan, Russia's War, A Chronicle and Analysis of the Revolution of Dignity. And The Cossack Myth, History and Nationhood at the Age of Empires, and many others. All those books are available on Amazon and are certainly among the most in-depth resources available on Ukraine, so highly recommended and best prices as well. Serh Plokhii joins us today from Vienna. Serhii will be in a conversation with Myroslav Marynovych, honorary president of PEN Ukraine, Ukrainian human rights activist, journalist, religious scholar, member of the Ukrainian Helsinki Group, organizer of the Amnesty Movement in Ukraine, and also vice rector of the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. Myroslav Marynovych was one of the voices that criticized Soviet politics running during a time when it was a guaranteed reason to be under the watch of the KGB, Committee for State Security. Marynovych was arrested and accused of conducting anti-Soviet agitation and propaganda, and sentences to a maximum term of imprisonment of 7 years in the maximum security camps and 5 years of exile. Since last Monday in Russia, the same criticism or simply referring to the word as a war could cost a person 50 years in jail. Marynovych is a founder of the first Amnesty International in the USSR in 1991 and Amnesty International in Ukraine. Myroslav is one of the members of the UNIV group and the First December Initiative group. He has been bestowed the Cavalier of Orders of the Intellectual Courage and the Order of Freedom for prominent personal contribution to the defense of human rights, courage, and dedication in the struggle for freedom and independence of Ukraine. Myroslav Marynovych speaks today from Lviv. Thank you both for joining our dialogues today, and Sergei, stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Olga. Thank you very much for this invitation and for this opportunity really to speak to Ukrainian legend, Myroslav Marynovych. I am also thankful for this very, very kind and generous introduction. One of the books that was listed there is not my book. I just wrote an introduction to it, but it's maybe the book that most interesting, or can be most interesting for readers today. It is Mikhailo Vinnytsky's book, Ukrainian Maidan, Russian War. So I really recommend it. I recommended it before it was published, and I recommend it now. Well, we are today in the 14th day of the war, of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. The war that is still called a special military operation in Russia. And even Ukrainian allies didn't think that Ukraine would last for more than 2 days. So we are today, this is the second week. And my first question is to Myroslav Marynovych is, how are you doing? How is your family? How are your friends, loved ones? Please let's start with that. It is extremely trying time, personally and for the country, for the nation as a whole.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm in safety. I am in Lviv now with my wife, and I invited two relatives of mine from Kyiv, and they are now in my house. And I see how horrible these days were for them, because they are in very bad psychological shape. I witness how difficult it is for Lviv to accept 30,000 people every day, refugees and displaced persons. Of course, this difficulty is not comparable to the difficulty people suffer in Kharkiv, Melitopol, and other places in Kyiv. But at the same time, it's challenging, and the whole Ukraine is in big horrors. And these horrors are comparable to the horrors of World War II. When you see the over-occupied Lviv railway station in the night, it's pictures from the films about the World War II, and it's horrible.
It is, and I certainly can relate to that, coming from Zaporizhia, and certainly being in touch with my relatives and friends in all those places. You are apart from being husband, relative, and a citizen, you're also the vice rector of the Ukrainian Catholic University, one of the leading universities, at least in my opinion, in Ukraine. What the war means for the university, for the staff, for the students? Do you continue with your classes? You don't continue? What do you do? What part of your daily life communications and things like that are taken by your duties at the university?
Okay. During the first days, we started to transform our regular lectures into talking to students, because they were in a big shock. So all our professors started to work as psychologists and sometimes psychiatrists. But now we divided our activity. First, a lot of our students who are staying in Lviv are volunteers. And there is a huge space, especially for volunteers at our university, when we receive some humanitarian aid from the West and repack and reload them on other transportation to deliver to Kharkiv, to Kyiv, to other places in the East. Also, we accept many refugees, many displaced persons at our premises. We cannot accept all of them, but we gave priority, for example, for parents of our students, and it's logical, and other, for example, our partners from other universities, so in this way. And then the third direction of our activity is information. We are working with our partners in the world, trying to reach their brains and their hearts with information, heartbreaking information about the situation in Ukraine.
Well, thank you, Myroslav. Well, certainly I can only imagine what the university goes through, but certainly it tries its best and to help Ukraine. And it's very difficult time, trying time. But when we had an email exchange before our today's meeting, there was one thing that you wanted certainly me to mention or to raise. And that was the fact that today's anniversary of Taras Shevchenko. That was on your mind. I opened my Facebook. It was as much about the war in the Facebook as about Shevchenko. And this is the event organized by PEN. So Shevchenko is, of course, a major poet, writer, author. So there is no probably point to say that, okay, poets matter. But still, I wonder whether you could talk about that, why Shevchenko is important today, why you mentioned Shevchenko in the middle of all this war, of all these challenges. What is there for you, what is there for Ukraine in that 19th century poet?
Yes, Taras Shevchenko comes to Ukrainians always in the most difficult times. I remember the time in prison. I had a small Kobzar, small poetry book of Shevchenko with me from the very beginning. And his poetry just revealed its inner depth and inner strength, much more than during the normal life. When there is a clash between good and evil, Shevchenko appears immediately. That's why we Ukrainians always say that it is another gospel for us, because he, as God, he comes to Ukrainians when they suffer. It was very obvious during all Maidans. Shevchenko's poetry was quoted, was exhibited, and people lived with this spirit of struggle between good and evil. And now he comes again to appeal to us and to encourage us to stand for truth.
Well, yeah, I was also thinking that, again, you mentioned you being prisoner of Gulag as a dissident, and certainly Shevchenko was exiled and wrote good part of his poetry in exile. So to a degree, he was a dissident before the term in that particular sense, in that particular meaning, was there. Well, let me maybe read an excerpt from Shevchenko, which basically I think illustrates very much what you have been saying. And this is from Caucasus, from his poem. and our human spirit dies not, and our freedom dies not. It is for us to keep on weeping with bloody sweat and bitter tear, and mix each day with our daily bread. Truth will rise, and so will freedom. And I also looked online for English translation, of course, of poetry. The first thing that popped up immediately was an article by George Lutsky from 1964, whether Shevchenko was a symbol of universal freedom. And again, certainly freedom is the word that he uses very much. And that leads me to my next question, in the sense of sometimes the people talk about this current war as about war more than defense of Ukraine, but it's a defense of Europe or defense of universal values. I wonder whether you see that in that way as well, whether it's bigger than Ukraine, whether there is something universal, something European that Ukrainians defend today through their heroism and through the suffering, enormous suffering.
Yeah. I would give even wider picture. And let me start from the moment that in the 20th century, there were two totalitarian systems, Nazi and communist system. Nazi system was condemned. And the reasons, the sources of this ideology were clarified and in some countries even forbidden by law. And the German nation passed through moral reckoning, and it liberated itself from this ideology. It didn't happen in our part of the world with the communist ideology. After Yalta agreement, the communist ideology, communist crimes were hidden by the toga, by the stages of victorious victorious Soviet Union who defeated the Nazi Germany. And all crimes were forgiven. At least there was no Nuremberg for communist crimes. And we knew perfectly well, I mean, we former political prisoners knew perfectly well that seeds that were left in the ground will give new, how to say that, springs. And it happened in modern Russia. Putin's regime is a reincarnation of the Dzerzhinsky-Stalin thing. It's not strange that Stalin is still a hero for Putin, for many, many Russians. So we have a reincarnation of the communist regime, and now the humanity in general has to understand that we will not go further into the 21st century without coming to an end, or how to say that in good English, reckoning with this heritage of communist regime. It's very difficult to understand in the West, because the West was living in a win-win realm. And it's wonderful. I appreciate that win-win solution for the world. but we have a criminal government that cannot be equalized with a normal state. And during these days, I saw Euronews. And that was first the news from Ukraine, all these atrocities, bombing, and so on. And then Lavrov, Russian foreign minister, speaking that no, we are not bombing living spaces. And who knows where is the truth? This is the typical Western journalist ethics, to give two opinions. But we cannot find a golden mean between good and evil. That's the point. That's why my appeal to the world is go out of this world of win-win. When Putin's regime will be defeated, when the Russian nation goes through the moral reckoning, then we may re-establish again this normal civilized win-win style of life, but not with this regime. And I see that still there is a precondition that, well, we have to be in dialogue with Putin. But nobody spoke that we had to be in dialogue with Hitler.
There were people who spoke that way, and there were people who were in dialogue with Hitler. Okay. And the difference is that, of course, that was, they were condemned, and their views and their positions are unacceptable today. And this certainly didn't happen back in the 20th century with the communist regime, Stalinist regime in particular. And what you are saying basically seems to be quite obvious. So the unprovoked attack on a peaceful country is evil. Killing civilians and sending millions into exile is evil. And that the evil shouldn't get the same hearing and the same platform as the victims and people who fight against this evil.
But you know,
it seems to be very obvious, but difficult somehow for some maybe outlets to accept that clear moral clarity on those issues.
Yeah. But I would like to say a few words from the perspective of PEN, because for us members of PEN, International PEN Ukraine, it's clear that the cornerstone of our activities is defending a word, but it means defending truth. We may be faithful to our mission only if we are faithful to truth. But it is exactly what is under the attack in Russia. The information war launched against Ukraine is just unbelievable. Starting from fascist cliques, nationalists seizing power, understate, little green man, we are not there. All these cliches are just the symbol of lie. Now we all see that Russia gathered troops near Ukrainian border before the war, but Russia blamed Ukraine and NATO for threatening Russia. So all the time we are accused. Now Russia is trying to denazify Ukraine. It's unbelievable. What has to be denazified is the Russian regime. So again, we see how a word is under attack. A word is suffering. And I'm sure that it is legitimate for PEN members to oppose, first of all, to oppose these awful propaganda, false propaganda that is being distributed all over the world.
Thank you, Myroslav. I think it is a very important call for action, in the sense that the action has to be in defense of truth, and that's what I think this war also very much about. Let me maybe return to the place where I started, and this is about the war that no one expected to last for more than a few days, and the expectations of that kind were because no one expected the Ukrainian nation really raise in defense of itself, and also of the truth and those universal values, or at least part of them that you were talking about. So could you please maybe tell us, in your opinion, why, first of all, the Ukrainians, why do they fight? And why no one or very few actually expected that to happen? So what is there that is in Ukraine that the people from outside of Ukraine failed to see, whether those people were in Moscow or in Paris or in Vienna or in New York?
Yeah. It will become clear when we look at the two goals of Putin, because it's from the opposite. Ukrainians want to cancel, to oppose what Putin wants. So first of all, after 1991, Ukraine and Russia started to move in a different direction. Ukraine slowly began to make inroads into the European future, overcoming communist trauma. At the same time, Russia started its way back to the totalitarian past. And nowadays, all new laws just re-established the totalitarian regime in Russia. But Putin proposed his authoritarian model as the only one acceptable for the East Slavic peoples, nations. So Ukrainian democracy became unbearable for him. And now look at Ukrainian emotions. We do not want to come back to totalitarian state. We experienced freedom already. We had freedom of speech very clearly. Of course, we had to overcome many weaknesses inherited after the communist regime, but we tasted the taste of freedom. That is the reason why Ukrainians are opposing this Putin idea. And the second goal by Putin, he publicly and in a very brutal manner denied the national identity of Ukrainians and our state subjectivity, understate and so on. There is no such a nation. But the revival of the Russian Empire, because his idea fix. But this idea cannot be realized without Ukraine. Because in Kyiv, in the heritage of Kievan civilization lies the legitimization of the Russian Empire. So we want to fight for our independence. We tasted this independence. We do not want to come back to the Russian past. So that's, as you see, this logic, the double logic, gives us enormous power. And maybe let me give some spiritual dimension about that.
Yes, please do.
The Putin's regime uses three elements of evil. Lie, I spoke about that, then hatred, and many non-Russian people just cannot imagine the level of hatred in the Russian internet and official and social media. It's enormous level of hatred against Ukrainians and violence, aggression. So all these three elements are the elements of evil. So for us, this is the struggle with evil, because we want to live in the world of truth, we want to live in a world of compassion, and we do not want to live under totalitarian violence. That's why we see that as a I cannot say Armageddon, but as a struggle between good and evil. That's all.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about the images that we're getting today from the either besieged or formerly occupied by the Russian troops cities and towns in southern Ukraine, where people are not afraid to go there with the Ukrainian flags, protest against the invasion, confront without weapons the occupying forces. And this is happening in the cities and regions where the dominant language is Russian, in particular in urban areas. The cities that are bombed and where the war atrocities are taking place and crimes are taking place today are mostly Russian-speaking cities, so that the same population that Putin claims he wants to liberate. And that brings me maybe to other question related to what you were saying, but you mentioned something, said a few words about the Ukrainian nation and national identity. So what is that national identity? Because the maps that people can see on the internet are not just the maps of the military operations, it's also Ukraine divided between Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers. The Russian language and defense of the Russian language is a big part of the propaganda effort on the part of Russia. So what is Ukrainian nation for you? It's the language. You are the vice rector of the Ukrainian Catholic University. The majority of the country, at least traditionally, is Orthodox. So there are linguistic differences. There are differences in terms of the church. So what makes a Ukrainian nation and this resolve to defend itself on that level?
Yeah. Thank you. Very, very good question. Now, when I speak about Ukrainian identity, I use the term mosaic identity. Ukrainian identity is not homogeneous. It's mosaic. And our main challenge is to find a proper way to harmonize all these mosaic differences. And during Maidans, we managed to do that. And we understood that, yes, we can. it's not fatal moment for Ukraine. Yes, we can be united. And now it is even more visible. There is no difference between different regions in the sense of struggling for our freedom. Now, you observed very in a perfect way that Putin attacked the Russian-speaking territories, first of all, predominantly. But let me first give you some theoretical picture. We all know that there are some linguistic controversies in Belgium. Well, they are regulated in a legal and practical sense, but imagine that, well, let's say France announced the war to Belgium, blaming Belgium for violating Francophone groups, rights of Francophone groups, and tried to occupy Belgium to not denazify Belgium state. This is the picture that may illustrate what happened in Ukraine. Of course, saying that our identity is a mosaic, I recognize and I admit that there are differences in, there were some controversies between Ukrainian speaking and Russian speaking people, but these controversies would never become a violent conflict, a military conflict, without Russia. It was Russia who transformed these controversies into a war now. That's why it's a tragic irony that the Russian-speaking population suffered most. So in order to bring safety for these regions, Putin's regimes just ruined their life totally.
Well, and speaking about denazification of the country that is led by, in terms of the background, the only Jewish president outside in Europe, outside of Israel, or that the minister of defense of Jewish background as well, and that's just one more dimension of the kind of Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian patriotism that Ukraine manifests itself today. My next question is about the future. And first of all, what gives you hope that Ukraine will succeed in this battle? You look at the map, you see how big is the Russian Federation. Again, the map is maybe misleading, but the population is at least 3 times as big as in Ukraine. What gives you hope in that situation when you look at the map, when you look at numbers?
Let's come back to the 70s, the late 70s. I was in prison then, and the Brezhnev regime looked strong, very strong. But still we, political prisoners, smell the smell of death of this regime. We were sure that sooner or later this regime will fail. And it happened in 1891. Now, Russia seems to be one of the strongest states in the world, at least according to Putin. But we see the inner weakness of this state. And again, I feel the smell of death of this regime. And it gives me hope. on the one hand, Ukraine found enormous energy to defend itself, and on the other side, I see that the weakness, spiritual weakness of Russia, all this big Russian literature, all the Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, it is, all of them are not used in modern Russia. Putin tries to restore the greatness of Russia and power of Russia in military strength, in lie and hatred. It's the dead end, the road to dead end. And that's why I'm optimistic. I don't know how many victims would be. And I don't know the price of that, but I see the agony of the Putin's regime.
And what about the big Russian nation, the idea that Russians and Ukrainians are one and the same people, and that's at least proclaimed Russian alpha war. What is happening with that idea of affinity, cultural, linguistic, historical affinity of Russians and Ukrainians? What does the war do to that concept?
Yeah. I am absolutely sure that God didn't create a criminal nation. And humanity passed through several examples when some nations were announced to be a criminal, to be evil, the incarnation of evil, but later we understood that this picture is wrong. Because every nation has a possibility to transform itself. So I believe that the Russian nation also has this ability. But just compare the dynamic and compare the proper moment. If you ask Germans under the Nazi in 1932, 33, all of them would support Hitler. Now,
the majority, yes.
The majority. Now the majority of Russians support Putin. That's why I speak that I believe that after the fall of the Putin regime, I would expect the moral reckoning of Russian people. By the way, it is also the challenge for Ukrainians, because many Ukrainians also supported the communist regime. So they have their task as well, not only Russians. But first of all, Russians, of course. Now it is very clear.
Well, we conduct our conversation in English, right? So it is lingua franca. That's the language in which world speaks, communicates with each other. And being outside of Ukraine, I'm really amazed by the outpouring of support on all levels for Ukraine and the struggle of Ukrainians, and the reports that are coming from Poland immediately on the border with Ukraine are amazing in terms of the solidarity that is there. And this is given that the relations were not really great before the start of the war. So what is your reading, being in Ukraine, in particular in the western part of Ukraine? What do you make out of this support of immediate neighbors of Ukraine, who manifest that not just in maybe donations, or not maybe in the Facebook post, but they take people whom they never saw in their lives into their homes, share their homes and share their food with them. What is, again, there is clearly a major change, and I wonder what is the reason for that change? What drives it?
Yeah. Please rearrange your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question is about this outpouring of support for Ukraine, particularly in the neighboring countries, which take in refugees. And how you look at that? What you think? What emotions that?
Yeah. First of all, gratitude, big gratitude. Because at first day, it was very difficult psychologically for Ukraine, because we suggested that we are alone in this struggle. But now we see that more and more countries express their solidarity with us, and not only word solidarity, but also practical support. So I do not want to list those nations, because it's always a danger to miss somebody. But we really appreciate this support. And at the other hand, I am very anxious that, you know, some people are not rioters, and some people who flee the country may misbehave in a different situation. So I'm afraid that this feeling of solidarity will be changed in some human hearts. So I ask all of Europeans who are listening me now, just to understand that people in frustration, in shock, may behave in a different way. So please forgive them.
Thank you so much. Thank you both. It's a shame to say that time running out, but that was just too important to be interrupted. Just some short closing remarks, please.
Yes, but let me quote Shevchenko. And maybe I ask Serhii to translate that. Борітеся, поборете, вам Бог помагає. За вас слава, за вас воля і воля святая. Sorry, I forgot.
So,
за вас правда, за вас сила і воля святая.
Fight and you will prevail, and the truth and freedom, the sacred freedom is helping you. So again, that's probably the worst translation of Shevchenko in the history of Shevchenko translations, but I hope it captures the spirit.
Yeah, it definitely captured the spirit. Thank you both, Myroslav Marynovych and Serh Plokhii, our priceless voices from Lviv and Vienna. This conversation brings light to the most important questions asked by all the thinking people around the world. How are you doing, Ukraine? And what can we do as intellectuals and also PEN members? And we are grateful to our partners for today's event: PEN America, the Ukrainian Institute, the Ukrainian Institute London, Harvard University Ukrainian Research Institute, and for the cross-streaming service on all the partners' pages. Gratitude, of course, and special solidarity to PEN Ukraine, which continues to stand in the front lines in the name of freedom and truth. PEN International is proud to be a platform that supports freedom of expression. Please follow our page to be informed about further events over the next week. And the next episode will be broadcast on Friday, 11th of March at 6 p.m. Kyiv time, 4 p.m. London time. And it's my pleasure to announce our speakers: Alim Aliyev, Deputy Director of the Ukrainian Institute, human rights defender and co-founder of Crimea South Movement, and Burhan Sönmez, President of PEN International and Kurdish prize-winning novelist from Turkey. And let me close today's event by quoting Taras Shevchenko, whose birthday is today, from his poem entitled The Caucasus, written in 1845 and translated by John Weir. Our spirit never can be downed. Our striving is to be free. The sateless one will never plow the bottom of the sea. The vital spirit he can't chain or jail the living truth. He cannot dim the sacred flame the great God's fame on earth. Thank you. Follow our dialogues on war, share the stream, and stand with Ukraine. This is our shared responsibility today.
Thank you.